Welcome to iCave Answers, where I answer all of your questions. It is event day for Apple today, so we've got a lot of questions to answer about these MacBook Pros and all the other stuff that we might be seeing today, so let's get right into it. I'm iCave Dave, and I simplify Apple so that everything just works for you. And if you want the latest Apple leaks, news and rumours every weekday at 12 UTC, like this video, subscribe to the channel and ring my bell. And the first question comes from the Golden S. iCave Answers, what do you think the software support for the Apple Silicon Macs will be? As when Google makes a phone with their own silicon, they get 5 years of security updates. What about 8 to 10 years of software updates for the M1 MacBook Pro? Google is making a big thing of doing 5 years of software updates for their new Pixel phones that they're talking about releasing tomorrow. Apple is currently on about 7 years worth of support for the iPhone 6s, which is out right now, and in general Macs get around about 7 years of full software support too. But Apple also does release security patches for previous versions of the Mac operating system, as well as iOS, even for the unsupported devices now, so probably, pushing towards maybe 10 years for security updates. FB London asks, iCave Answers, having seen the HTC Vive Flow released today, could Tim Cook give us one more thing with an Apple VR headset on Monday? I would be incredibly surprised if that does happen. There's always a possibility of stuff, but there's been no rumours of it coming. There's been no kind of insight that it might be coming. Never say never, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Team Kinetix asks, iCave Answers, are you excited for the new Pixel announcement on Tuesday? Don't care. Team Kinetix also asks, iCave Answers, based on the leaked resolutions and leaked specs, what physical dimensions do you think the MacBook Pro 14-inch and 16-inch will be? Do you think the lid will be thicker for the 1080p camera, or will there be witchcraft involved? So yeah, I am expecting these MacBooks to be thicker than the current ones, and I don't just mean looking thicker at the edges, I think actually thicker, because I think they are going to need to make the lids thicker, not specifically for the camera, but more for the display itself. If we look at the M1 iPad Pro, the 12.9 inch, which had the mini LED display added to it, that had to get a little bit thicker. Now everything is in there for the iPads. They obviously don't have a keyboard or anywhere else to put batteries. It all has to go in there, but it got thicker purely because of the mini LED display, and so I think that might be the case here too. I think they do need a little bit more room on the insides. Plus, because they're not going to taper the edges of the display off, it is going to just look like a real chunky boy on the sides, presumably. That's what we're expecting to see. We will see in a couple of hours. Marcin Kowalczyk asks, iCave Answers, Home Depot. I wonder if Apple made blenders, microwaves, ovens, etc., what would they look like? So I think pretty much anything that Apple makes is always going to look pretty minimal. They're always quite smooth, they use very premium materials and things like that. Now myself and Apple Tomorrow did do a little concept of what it would look like if Apple made a robot vacuum cleaner, and I think you'll agree, it looks pretty awesome. Basically looks like a little Mac Mini that will drive around your house and clean your carpets. Harsh Verdun Sharma asks, iCave Answers, do we need to buy a USB hub for M1X MacBook Pros, though they'll be having some more ports? Well, that entirely depends on your needs. A hub on your desk can be very useful because you could potentially plug in 1 or 2 cables, or one port if it goes directly into the 2 ports on the side. And basically that can be a one-stop shop to connecting you to everything else that you need to connect to. So you could have displays plugged into that one hub, you could have external hard drives, you could have Ethernet for your office network, for example, you could have all sorts of stuff, you could have a desktop microphone like this, you could have the works, external keyboard and mouse can all be connected to that. So you could be using a hub not because you need more ports, but because then you only have to attach one thing in order to kind of connect to everything else that's there. And obviously it does depend on what ports you need. If you need a CFast card rather than an SD card, you're going to need to plug something in. If you need a whole bunch of USB-A ports, you're going to need to plug something in. So it really depends on your use case. Nitrex asks, with the jump to 16 or 32 graphics cores expected on the new M1X processor, do you think we'll also see an increase in memory bandwidth to fill those cores? Possibly using 4 memory chips instead of 2. If it's the same, I can't see it being possible to get double or quadruple the GPU performance with such a bottleneck. And you don't actually have to worry about this at all, because the M1 as it is right now, before we even get to the M1X, has 8 channels of 16-bit memory, which gives you a total bandwidth of 68.2 gigabytes per second. And when you compare that to Intel, up to and including their enthusiast chips, which are their overclockable ones, they have 2 channels, not 8. Now, I understand that dedicated graphics will generally have a little bit more than those 2 for the onboard memory that they have, but I don't think we're going to have any struggles here. Rico the MLG Pro asks, I gave answers, when do you think the AirPods Max will be updated, i.e. AirPods Max 2 or AirPods Max Sport? This is a bit of a tricky one because the AirPods Max only came out last December, so they've not been out for a year yet, and it does seem like Apple tends to do about a 3-year refresh cycle for their headphones, for their AirPods and AirPods Max, I would guess. Maybe even up to a 4-year cycle, because I think it was 2017 that the AirPods second generation came out. I think the AirPods Pro might have even been before that. Apple's not in a rush to update these things. I'm not sure what they would be adding. Obviously, the sport version would be a bit lighter. I think if anything, if they're going to do a to-go version that might be a little bit closer to maybe like a Beats Solo kind of look, it might come at the same time that Apple Watch gets its rugged version. So that could be more your kind of sports out and about. Maybe there's a whole sports event that Apple might be bringing to us. That would be an interesting thing. And that could actually line up with Apple TV when they do a refresh that brings motion control and that sort of thing. Maybe we get FaceTime cameras, motion tracking on Apple TV. That's, I think, the kind of time that they might do it. Do a big event that's all focused around fitness and sport and activity and outdoors. Dagur asks, I gave answers, possibility of an M1X iMac 24-inch to replace the 4-port model currently offered at Monday's announcement. Pro Mac Mini to M1X in spring of 2022. Now, on the first part, on the iMacs, I think we're likely to get an M1X iMac. Well, not likely. So I think I'd put the chances of getting an M1X iMac 24-inch probably around about 50%. I would put getting the larger iMacs at maybe 10%. Really not super confident in that one, but I don't think it would replace the 4-port model. I think it would be something that the 4-port model stays in the line on the M1s, and then this would be the next tier up from that. So maybe, I don't know, $15.99, maybe more than that. Maybe it would start at the $17.99, the same as the MacBook Pro 14-inch. That would be my best guess on that one. In terms of the Pro Mac Mini with the 2 M1Xs inside, I don't know if this is even a thing that they're going to do. I'm not sure if the Mac Mini is a form factor that they would put the 2 M1Xs in. I think the larger iMac is more likely for that, and also when we actually get to a Mac Pro, I think it's going to be small. It's going to be about half the size of what we have now. I don't think it's quite going to be Mac Mini sized, and I don't think we see any of these Mac Pro replacements until WWDC next year. Rod Tech asks, I gave answers, will there be enough MacBook 14-inch for consumers, and what will Apple do differently for them to sell more MacBook Pro 16s? Okay, so this is one of the really interesting things. I think we shouldn't have any supply constraints at the beginning. It doesn't seem like we're hearing that there are going to be constraints on this, but in terms of what Apple is going to do to sell more 16-inch instead of 14-inch, I think it's purely going to come down to screen size. I think everything else is going to be the same on these. Battery life will probably be much better on the 16-inch. Right now, Apple puts the biggest physical battery you can put into a laptop and be allowed to fly with it, so the battery isn't going to get any bigger, but you might well be looking at maybe 30 hours of battery life on the 16-inch, and it will probably be closer to sort of 16 to 18 on the 14-inch. So I think that's where the big difference is going to be screen size, and it's going to be battery life. Performance-wise, they'll be identical. A Hughes asks, iCave answers, it's looking like the M1X with 16GB and 16 GPU cores will outperform the current highest config 16-inch Intel MacBook Pro with 32 gigs and the Radeon 5600M, which was sitting at the top of the creator laptop sector along with the cream of the most powerful Windows laptops from Gigabyte, MSI, Dell, Razer, etc. Which begs the question, will the 32GB 32-core version be a lot more powerful than almost anyone's use case, assuming no gaming is involved? How hardcore a video editor or 3D modeler or multitasker do you have to be to make it worth going for the higher spec model? Well, anyone that's doing this stuff for a living, it will make a difference. So if you can render out your projects from a video editor in 30 minutes instead of an hour, that's an extra 30 minutes of productivity that you're going to get. So if your system is twice as fast, you're basically sitting around for half the time that you would be otherwise, where you can be more productive. This is exactly the same. It's not about the kind of real-time stuff and being able to scrub through a timeline, or being able to move and actually build your model quicker, in particular in 3D work or anything along those lines. It's more about the time that is taken when you actually come to render these things out, when you would otherwise be sitting there twiddling your thumbs waiting for everything else to happen. Now, I would say that on my M1 Mac Mini, I've had no issues with having to sit around waiting for a render. I can still do my thumbnails in Photoshop while it renders out the videos ready for me to upload. So that's really, really handy. But if you would, I'm not working with particularly taxing video codecs or anything like that. Everything for me comes straight out of the iPhone. I shoot in 1080p because it's going to YouTube. It needs to render quickly. It needs to upload quickly because it's news stuff. It needs to get out as quickly as it can. For people that are doing 4K work in 10-bit color, all that sort of stuff, it does make a big difference. Dante Borita asks, iCave answers, with the current 13-inch MacBook Pro with 16GB of RAM, 512 SSD costs $16.99. So how can we expect the 14-inch with M1X mini LED display and a new designed form factor to cost around the same? I thus think that the 14-inch MacBook Pro will start at $19.99 at least, but have 16 gigs of RAM and 512GB SSD, then add £200 for each RAM, SSD, GPU increment. Maybe more than £200 to upgrade to the 32-core GPU version, unless the existing M1 Max get a price cut. No, I think you could be right. We could be looking at a little bit of a higher price point, maybe $18.99, something like that. So you've still got that £200 price difference between M1 and M1X, plus you're getting all those extra other bits. But as we've said for a while, the M1 MacBook Pro doesn't make much sense. The M1 Air makes far more sense. The M1 Mac Mini and the iMac all make sense at their price point. The M1 MacBook Pro doesn't really. Paying an extra $300 or £300 to get a little bit longer battery life and a little bit brighter screen and the touch bar that nobody really wanted that they're getting rid of, which is another cost saving, so a reason that they could be closer in price, doesn't really make too much sense. Now, they could potentially release a version of the 13-inch MacBook Pro that removes the touch bar, and maybe take £100 off the price, $100 off the price. That could make sense. If they needed to cut the price, that would be the way to do it, I think, is to remove that feature and then drop the price slightly. Tony Ward asks, iCave answers, so hoping for HomePod 2 at an event this year. The HomePod was way ahead of its time, spatial audio, Dolby Atmos support and superb sound. The Sony HTA9 looks to be a very good product, but so much more expensive than 4 HomePods. Apple is making lossless audio available but has limited products that support it. We need HomePod 2 ASAP. Really don't want to buy Sony. Apple was the leader but discontinued the product earlier this year. Let's hope HomePod 2 arrives so Apple can lead again. So yeah, I mean, a new HomePod would be great. I don't think it's going to happen though. If Apple was looking to release a new HomePod this soon, they wouldn't have discontinued the other one. As we see with Apple Watches and iPhones and everything else, they're available right up until the next one is released. So Apple doesn't have, I don't think, any plans to release a new HomePod in the foreseeable future. So it might well come next year, you know, a couple of years of gap might make sense. This soon after discontinuing it completely doesn't really make sense to me, but I feel your pain. Team Kinetix, iCave answers, a notch on the new MacBook Pro. What are your thoughts? Possible Face ID? Will it put people off? a notch on a laptop? And also, Sander Hoogeland asks, what do you think of the rumoured notch on the MacBooks Pro? Do you think it might actually be a thing, and would you mind it, or maybe even like it if it were a thing? So obviously we covered this in the main video, and I was just kind of going through the facts of it. Here's the situation really. If we do get this notch, if the MacBook Pros have a notch on the top of the display, it's so they can make the bezels thinner around the rest of it, so they're not having to keep the bezels at the same size that you would have for the camera at the top. Now, everyone seems to complain right now about top bezels being different from bottom bezels or side bezels, so if they want to make it even all the way around apart from this notch, that would be absolutely fine. They would be able to have a lot thinner bezels around the edges, which I would be personally a big fan of, so I'm down with it. Now, there's no indication that we would be getting Face ID. It looks like you've just got the camera in there, the indicator light, and potentially the light sensor, which is for your screen brightness and all that kind of thing. So not really expecting us to see Face ID on this. The notch is going to be there ready for when Face ID is ready to join the Macs. And that's it for this video, guys. We're back in a couple of hours with the live stream over on the 941 podcast channel, so make sure you check that out. I'll put the link just up here so you can kind of join in. We'll be doing Q&A, we'll be chatting. It's myself, Saran Bites, and Mark Sequence, so please join us there. And then we'll be doing our own after party right back here on the channel after the event. It's going to be a big night.